Sir Chris Hoy, Sir Bradley Wiggins and Chris Froome are just some of the inspirational faces behind Britain's cycling successes. Now MPs want us to follow their example and get on our bikes.
Well, they hope that 40 years from now, a quarter of all journeys will be made by bike. And this afternoon, they'll be debating how to get more of us cycling more frequently and more safely.
Let's discuss these plans with cycling campaigner Lizzie and Phil Jones, who's a transport consultant. Morning, both. Thanks very much for joining us. This is sort of perennial thing that we talk about a lot here on Breakfast. I know that you're a dedicated cyclist. What would make it easier for you? What are your particular issues?
Well, my commute is a bit of a nightmare because the motorway has kind of cut off my village from the centre of Leeds. So from my home, I've got a choice of either a dual carriageway that's very busy with lorries and cars and then a nasty roundabout, or I have to push my bike across a field to get to a safer route. So it's not ideal.
And you push your bike because your family were unhappy with you going on the dual carriageway?
Yeah, I was kind of caved into peer pressure from all my friends and family that just said it's too dangerous to go that way.
And when they look at the statistics, the number of cyclists killed on Britain's roads rose by 10% in 2012, while the overall number of deaths fell. So there's reason for your friends and family to be nervous on your behalf.
Well, I think so, and I think it's an interesting statistic. I think when you look at, compared to European countries, we're not doing very well with vulnerable road users. People in cars tend to be quite safe on the UK's roads. People on foot and on bikes aren't.
Phil Jones, let's pick up that European point, because we sort of, the Dutch, for example, have a very good reputation when it comes to getting people cycling and all the rest of it. And can we just not buy in some of what they do? It's not that simple, is it?
We can, and the government is committed, they say, the Department of Transport, to looking at new types of facility. But we have a problem. Some of the details of the infrastructure that they use, we simply can't use with the current regulations that we have in this country. So we do have to change some things. For example, the way that zebra crossings work, we can't put a cycle crossing next to a zebra crossing in this country. You know, there's the details of how the Dutch get around a roundabout is just not something that we can do. And I know the Department of Transport is looking at that, but we need to make some fundamental changes in order to give designers the tools to replicate the kind of infrastructure that we have on the continent.
And of course, Lizzie, the Dutch and the Danish and the Swedes developed their system over decades, so it's not going to change overnight. If you had a shopping list, what would be on it for cycling safety?
Well, I think when you look at the government's response to the Get Britain Cycling report, what we really need is to fund cycling properly. Although they've announced some more funding, it's really not enough.
And then if you had that, I mean, because they've, what is it, £300 million they're talking about spending, aren't they? Which is a very significant sum. But if you had the money that you wanted, what would you spend it on?
I think you've got to look at making main roads safer, and that probably means separate cycle paths alongside main roads, not expecting people to cycle on those main roads, but also trying to put out 20-mile-an-hour speed limits, make residential areas a bit calmer and a bit more safe for cycling.
One of the ideas, isn't it, is to bring down the speed limits in residential areas. I can imagine lots of car drivers going, so why do we have to drive more slowly?
Well, of course, it makes it safer for everyone. But you know, as Lizzie said, it's not just about the 20-mile-an-hour routes, or that clearly helps. The main roads are the most direct routes, so people want to travel on those roads. They're the routes that usually are most direct. So we have to put in some proper cycle infrastructure on those routes. That's what the Dutch, the Danes, the Swedes have been doing for decades, and we really need to match that, both in terms of the investment, but there's a danger that if we just rush money at it, that we won't get the quality of the provision that other countries have.
Over the weekend, Laura Trott, the Olympic cyclist, gave an interview to a paper and accused cyclists, actually, of being reckless and causing accidents themselves by failing to obey the rules of the road. Now, this is a very fierce debate, but when someone like Laura says that, has she got a point?
I think there's two things to say about that. One is that if you look at the demographics of who's cycling, particularly in central London, it's a lot of young professionals, people who are quite assertive. Because we don't have a lot of families, older people, younger people cycling, you can't necessarily expect kind of normal standards of behaviour from those people. We've made the roads so hostile that actually the only people who are brave enough to cycle on them are quite aggressive people.
Yeah, I mean, that's interesting that you call it literally a hostile environment. Is that something that you would agree with then?
Very much so. I think if you treat people well, they'll behave well. I've recently come back from Sweden, where we've been doing some research work for Transport for London in terms of cycling provision. And what you see there is really good cycle behaviour, cyclist behaviour. In fact, they're not really cyclists, they're just people on bikes.
Yes.
And they're cycling properly because they have traffic lights, they help them cross. They don't have to jump the lights.
I mean, I can, you know, every time we talk about this, people say, oh, well, I've seen, you know, a cyclist go over a traffic light, you know, done X, Y and Z. You know, it really upsets people.
Yeah, but we see motorists behaving badly all the time. And that doesn't, we don't say, well, we won't invest in new motorways.
There are fines, aren't there? I mean, there are fines for cycling as well.
Of course, that's right. You know,
in the long term, to get back to sort of the infrastructure idea, is it something you think that planning authorities should be looking at, so that when somebody puts in a new development, they should be required to put in a cycle path or something like that?
Absolutely right. I think we've got to get away from assuming that everybody will drive and think about how we can build communities so that they're fit for people to cycle as well.
Yeah, we as a practice, we do work for developers, and I know that many developers would be happy to do that, but there has to be a requirement from the local authority. If their requirement is simply to fund new traffic infrastructure, then that's what they have to do to get planning consent. So it's a matter of setting the right context for these developments to happen.
Phil Jones, Lizzie Reether, thank you both very much.
Thank you.